very short presentation about the history of hunting. Hunting has been around the world for thousands of years. Almost all the tribes all over the world have hunted primarily for survival, and that includes the Native American tribes in the United States. If they wanted to eat and survive, they had to hunt, and they had to get meat for the tribes and the families to survive. So hunting was very much a part of the Native American culture, and when the colonists arrived, they also brought with them their love for hunting, and both the colonists and the Native Americans did it primarily for food. Then they started doing it a little bit more for sport, and that's when things may have started to turn negatively in the hunting, when the colonists decided that they were going to kill buffalo for no other reason than to kill them and perhaps harm the Native Americans. The buffalo population started to decrease. If no regulations were passed in the United States, there may be an issue with a decrease in animal populations. However, hunting today is very regulated. There are laws about when and where and how you can do that. And in fact, with those laws, individuals who want to hunt have to pay various fees for licenses, stamps, and the permission to hunt. And all of that money will go back into maintaining the population of the wildlife. Hunting money has gone into increasing the amount of animals. They will pay for their reintroduction into the wild. They will pay for their habitat. They will pay for their feed. That goes for large game animals, small game animals, and also fish. So all the money that hunters are paying throughout the world right now, and including in the U.S., has gone to increase the wildlife populations. Now, the question being, our ancestors had to hunt to survive because they needed the food. So why are people hunting in our society today? And that's a question that has been asked and bounced around a lot of times. Most people will give an answer of why they're hunting now as still the same answer that our ancestors gave. It's a major source of food. Some families and individuals do not purchase any meat from any stores or farms, but rather they hunt their meat, and that's their sole source of protein. Other individuals will hunt to protect themselves, their home, perhaps from predators, and then some individuals will still do it for sport, yet almost all hunters who do it for sport will consume the meat that they bring home. In the early days of hunting in the U.S., before there were laws and regulations, individuals were hunting anytime they wanted for any animal they wanted, and there was some risks to the environment and also the wildlife population. Also, there was disputes over the land and water, who owned them and who had the right to hunt them. In various parts of the world, the land and water, and actually the air, is owned by governments. And in the United States, there was a debate: should the government own the land, the water, the air, or is it available for all humans to use with reasonable care and for reasonable practices? So a law was put into effect called the Public Trust Doctrine, and that's a principle that certain resources are preserved for public use, that the government is required to maintain them for public use. And this is primarily in two specific areas: land use and natural resource use. Basically what this means is no one single or private person, including the government, can own all the land and the waters, and there has to be some land and waters available for public usage, again under specific laws of what they could do there, but we have to preserve land and water for the public. The history of hunting and the public trust doctrine can be viewed on this link, or it's also in the resource section for hunting. The population of deer in Illinois is a great example of how hunting has actually benefited wildlife. When the colonists arrived, there was a lot of deer around. They started moving westward, and in Illinois, the settlers that were there began to deer hunt, and there was no regulations at this time. There was no set seasons or laws about how or where a person could hunt deer, and by the late 1800s, almost all the deer were gone from Illinois. With the help of hunters fees, and conservation organizations, between the years of 1950 and 1970, deer was reintroduced into Illinois. by the Department of Natural Resources. Not until the mid to late 70s did we see a lot of numbers of deers in wild in Illinois, and then towards the end of the 1970s they increased rapidly in number. That was because they were reintroduced by the Department of Natural Resources with the funds gathered from hunters. In today's society, that is preserved. A lot of money is put into maintaining the habitat, the wildlife of deers that live in Illinois, and you could probably see them almost every day of your life at this point in time. But it's substantially increased the number of deer present, and there are individuals who will still deer hunt and still harvest the deer, and that would be their primary means of protein in Illinois. I know it's hard to think about that in the Chicagoland area, that an individual would hunt for their food, but outside of the metropolitan area, most individuals in Illinois do hunt, and many hunt for deer for their meat source. Without laws, it could be almost assumed that all the deer would be extinct by now. But with those laws and regulations and charging individuals to hunt, we've been able to reintroduce deer into the wild, and there's a lot of benefits to that. First and foremost, if we talk about health, there's probably no more organic food than a wild animal or a wild-grown plant. No chemicals, no pesticides. The food that the animal consumes is completely organic. Again, they're going to be eating wild grasses, plants, and they have, if we know they have a good source of food in their diet, then their meat is going to be healthy for individuals as well. If we actually went to a grocery store right now, we would pay a lot more for grass-fed beef than we would for just a traditional beef sitting in the shelf. Basically, that animal who is been slaughtered and turned into just a regular traditional beef sitting on the shelf, which costs a lot less, their diet is pretty poor. It's usually spent grains or leftovers from another source of food production. Wild animals will have a more healthier diet, and they're going to consume lots of vitamins and minerals and healthy fat from the wild foods that they eat. So essentially, there's nothing more organic than a wild animal that is hunted and consumed for its protein. In addition to eating healthy, there are lots of other benefits of deer hunting. Less accidents in traffic with a reduction in deer population. If individuals did not hunt, there would be a lot more automobile to deer collisions. Actually, there was a case example in Arizona at one point in time, and they suspended hunting of mule deer, and were trying to increase the population of them. So said no one can hunt deer, nobody could take any deer for 1 year's time, and the population grew so enormous that there was not only a ton of auto deer accidents, but the deers actually starved to death and were dying on their own because of such overpopulation. There was not enough wild food for them to eat. So hunting controls animal disease and controls them for starvation. And finally, there's a lot of economic benefit to hunting. Individuals will travel from all over the world to Illinois to actually deer hunt because it's one of the best deer hunting states. And they're going to spend a ton of money on not only purchasing the licenses, but where they're going to be staying during their trip, the restaurants, the food they're going to be eating during their trip, buying items at stores during their trip. So various states have different animals that it's popular to hunt, and in Illinois, deer is the most popular animal. Lots of people will come and spend money to do that. Another popular animal to hunt in the Midwest is pheasants. They are not native to the land in America. Deer were native. They were here when the colonists and settlers came, but pheasant were actually brought over by the colonists. They were first thought to have grown in Asia, and then individuals who came to the United States brought them with them because they liked to sport hunt. And they have been reintroduced into the public throughout the Midwest. Every year they're bred by an organization called Pheasants Forever, whose main purpose is to conserve pheasants and their wildlife. So they're reintroduced into the wild every single year to try to increase the populations. And the money also raised by those type of organizations, such as Pheasants Forever, will be spent on improving the wildlife for them. To find out more about when, where, how, and why individuals will hunt, you could go to any Department of Natural Resources. The IDNR is the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Every state has their own, and that's a governing body by the federal government that oversees hunting, oversees wildlife conservation, and the land. They will set all the laws and regulations. For individual states. Also, there's some federal laws that will be in there as well. But you can only hunt during specific times of the year. And typically that's going to be November and December, sometimes October. And you can only hunt during these times, and there's a maximum number of animals you could take as well. So there's not an unlimited where you could go out and shoot like 100 geese at one day. There's a limit to how many you could take. That's called the bag limit, and there's also daily limits to how many you could have at one point in time. Again, the DNRs will assess a fee for hunting, and then they're going to use that fee to conserve the wildlife and the animals in that. And you also need specific paperwork and things in order to hunt in the state of Illinois, and most states have this as well, but anyone born after 1980 has to have gone through a hunter safety education course. The link for that is on this slide. No one can hunt without having this, and it talks about conservation of the wildlife, ethics of hunting, safe weapon handlery, and it talks about avoiding any type of accidents or mishaps. As with any act or activity, I'd always like to remind you that we have to look at the pros and cons of both sides of the story before making an educated opinion, and that goes for hunting as well. There are pro hunters and there are hunters who are, there are individuals who are against hunting. So I just encourage you to look at both sides of the story before making a decision about how and why people do this, and that's just keeping an open mind and being able to critique a situation after we've gathered various knowledge.